Hey, welcome back. Professor Wills here. Well, it's time to explore a little bit more deeply the idea of using powerful animals for their symbolic meaning. So we've talked about bulls in particular, going all the way back to the Paleolithic Stone Age. Um, but later on, with our earliest civilizations in Mesopotamia, we find the bull really having meaning to convey power and authority and strength. So, as our civilizations in Mesopotamia evolve, we're going to continue to see that in the art of the Assyrians, our next civilization up to bat, in our continued analysis here in Pasadena City College Art History of the Ancient Worlds units. So without further ado, let's get into a concept called a guardian creature. And I'll move on to the PowerPoint so you can have an idea of what I mean by that. So pulling up that PowerPoint, I'm going to go ahead and minimize myself here. All right. Very good. Now, you don't need to record all the data here. We're not focusing on this. This is just a contextual example, so I can explain what a guardian creature is. So here is something called the Lion's Gate. It's part of a culture or a civilization we are not examining in this class, the Hittites up in present-day Turkey, but it illustrates through this photo what I mean by a guardian creature. These are like gatekeepers. You might notice this is a very fortified gateway. There are big, thick boulders that form these walls, likely of some kind of a fortress or some kind of a barrier for entry for anybody who might approach. And what you find flanking each side of this gateway are statues of, unfortunately, very severely eroded lions. Well, lions, as we know, even today are kind of nicknamed the king of the jungle. Of course, they don't live in the jungle. They're more like savanna animals, but they are known for their strength. They are formidable and powerful, like bulls are as well. So it sends a message of strength and power to anybody who might approach this gate to this famous civilization. What we're going to look at in terms of how that's translated even today, if you ever happen to approach certain municipal buildings, government buildings, sometimes universities have these kind of gatekeeper statues. So this happens to be the New York Public Library that has its own set of lions. And then just for fun, I put this up for you all. Lionsgate is a Hollywood movie production company, entertainment company that you probably are familiar with your favorite Friday night movie. So another idea of a gateway, right? So the legacy of the ancient world continues until today, which is a lot of fun to examine. Now, just showing you a quick little map. You don't need to know the specifics of the geography of the Assyrian Empire, but you can see here how wide and far it's spread beyond this whole cradle of civilization around the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. You see that they are expanding, all the way up into present-day Turkey, even over to Egypt. So as we move further along in time, and here we are in the 800s to the 600s BC, you find these empires are becoming increasingly powerful, influential. They're conquering their neighbors, as you are very well aware. That's the story of mankind's history for sure. Now, one thing that's characteristic of the Assyrian Empire, because once you are big and powerful, you make maybe quite a few enemies as well. So something called a citadel is what came along. And a citadel is a walled and fortified palatial complex. So you could imagine the Assyrian king, his residence, but also his administrative compound would be located within these very thick walls that surround a citadel. So part of something you see with a citadel are gateways, of course, right? They're not just going to let anybody in the door to talk to the king. There are guards, and not just human guards, but yes, indeed, guardian creatures. So let's move on to some examples of a very specific fantastic beast, if I may borrow that term from J.K. Rowling, this kind of guardian creature called a Lamassu. So generally speaking, a Lamassu is a man-headed winged bull. You can make that out here. Here's a man's head, the body, here's some hooves of a powerful bull, and then I'll show you a side view of these magnificent, sprawling bird of prey wings, right? We're not talking about hummingbirds. We're talking about, again, another kind of tough creature, formidable, powerful creature that is a composite, an imagined fantastic beast, this kind of monster, right? In a way that forms this gatekeeper sculpted in limestone that reaches to a height of 17 feet. 17 feet. The years of this example are from the year circa 720 to 705 BCE, and it's associated with the famous Assyrian citadel of Sargon II in present-day Iraq. So these large monumental limestone sculptures come in pairs. I just am going to show you this slide very quickly with this woman whom I don't know, but I just wanted to show you very quickly, how they would be presented like those lions side by side as gatekeepers. Now, from the front, they look like freestanding sculptures. Beasts standing at attention like guards you find even in today's, modern government buildings. But from the side here, what's interesting is you can see that, in fact, it is a sculptural relief of a mix of both high and low relief. You can see that the wings of this beast form kind of a low relief, but then the heavy shadows, the very projected sculpture from that original block of limestone indicates that it is a high or raised relief. So what's also interesting about this is they think that this is meant to communicate the face of Sargon, the king of the Assyrians himself. So he is very much like the Great Sphinx, communicating human strength and intelligence through that face. The Lamassu here is wearing a crown, very common with sovereigns and kings. Look at this, we can't seem to get away from, references to bulls and bull horns, and the horns are wrapping in a double layer around that crown, not unlike we saw in the stele with the laws of Hammurabi with the god Shamash, right? Then there's this incredibly patternized beard and rigging that you find on the animal, and the wings too form this incredible display of pattern. So we've talked about this this aesthetic in the ancient world, this mix of abstract design and pattern combined with incredible naturalism. Now, I can't really say what I mean by naturalism in terms of the Lamassu is if it was a real creature, it is in proportion. We're not looking at those kind of exaggerated features we might have seen with huge eyes like we did with the Sumerians, that kind of thing. Everything is in proportion. You get this, it looks like an artist studied, analysis of a walking animal, of its joints and tendons and knuckles and muscle groupings. So it's got this believability that such a creature, right, could exist, which is part of the impression of it, right? You got to believe this is almost could come to life and prevent you from attacking that citadel, right? Okay, so moving on, this is also interesting because it has two views. There's a front view as well as a side view. Now from the front, as I mentioned, it looks like it's standing at attention, but from the side view, the creature looks like it's walking. But one thing you might have noticed, if you've been paying attention to the legs, is the sculptor threw in a fifth leg. I know most creatures have four legs, right? This one has a fifth leg, but that's part of the illusionism. They want you to believe that the creature from side view is walking. So again, it's that concept of naturalism, or the idea or concept is more important than any kind of realism or naturalism going on here. So those are the Lamassu. Sometimes they have, like in this slide, lion of the body of a lion. So you can see the claws here, whereas in our earlier slide, you could see hooves. Moving on here, I wanted to introduce you to another example, and I'm just going to take my image away so you won't be able to see me for a few minutes, but this is another example of communicating something through the use of powerful animals, and in this case, it is lions. This is a sculptural relief found at the palace of another Assyrian king, Ashurbanipal, in present-day Iraq, dating from the year 645 BCE. And it's called Assyrian King Hunting Lions. Well, it's one of a series of these sculptural reliefs in very shallow, low relief. As you can tell, this one shows a scene of a lion hunt. Now, this is meant to communicate a sport the king would participate in, where they would, get into their horse-drawn chariots. Some hunters are on horseback, but they would bring their bows and their staffs, the weapons of choice in those days, and they would hunt lions for sport. Much like it was done more, controversially earlier in the 20th century and before. And lions, of course, are a formidable target for any sportsman or sportswoman, but in those days, sportsmen. But what I want to communicate to you is that it's not about that as some kind of a recreational activity. It's really a metaphor for the king being successful as a hunter is analogous to the king as a successful warrior. So it's another way to communicate strength and power on the part of these Mesopotamian, specifically Assyrian kings. What's really remarkable about this particular example is when these, I know we've talked about concept over naturalism a lot, but these lions, whether lions or lionesses, are extremely naturalistic. And it's almost to the point of heartbreak to the modern viewer as we look at this lioness with her mouth agape, her rear legs now damaged beyond use, impaled with arrows, struggling to stand. But the proportions, the description of the anatomy under that beautiful fur coat, the muscles, the tendons, the joints, it shows a studied attempt to describe lions, but a variety of lions, right? They're not just repeated types like we saw with earlier artists in earlier eras. This one lunging as the final, most ferocious lion with its, mouth agape in a roar and claws deployed. Others already, hunted down, lying in death, but in a variety of poses. Now, of course, in contemporary times, this would be completely not okay. PETA, the Animal Rights Organization, would be all over it. But really, what it's communicating to the viewer by being displayed at Ashurbanipal's palace is his success on the hunting field would translate to the battlefield. But it's an example of when these ancient sculptors want to create something incredibly naturalistic, they can. It shows this observed study of the specific species of animal in a variety of poses that's surprisingly realistic. But another example of how the Assyrians use these powerful creatures, whether real or imagined, to communicate their supreme power and authority in that sprawling empire in Mesopotamia. All right, thanks for joining me.